Hello and welcome to another edition of Ace on Music. I'm your host, Ace Trump, and I'm joined by my producer, Mark. So, today I wanted to talk about something that has been in the media a great deal lately, and there is a bunch of organizations that are spending big money to buy up the musical rights to a lot of heritage artists and exploit that kind of thing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that and exactly what is being bought, how it's what it's being used for, and why this has suddenly become a much more, well, maybe it's not a new trend, but it's certainly one that's getting an awful lot of press. So I wanted to invite a couple of people onto the show here today. First of all, I'm going to invite my longtime business partner and Adam Parsons from Siren Artist Management.
Thank you,
Hey,
Ace.
Adam, how's it going?
Privileged. Very well. Very
Also joining
privileged to
us
be here.
today is, oh, I'm sorry.
There is actually a
Oh,
delay here. A
there
big
always
delay.
is. There always is.
Oh, okay.
And also joining us on the show today is previous visitor to our show. Seth is back to talk about publishing again. So welcome aboard, Seth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
So let's start this conversation a little bit about what exactly is going on here. We have some big headlines happening in the press these days. A lot of it is centered around Merck Mercurius's company, Hipgnosis Songs Fund. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to get the rights to some of these heritage artists. So let's start, first of all, with what exactly is a company like Hipgnosis buying when they say make a deal with Bob Dylan and pay him $400 million for the rights to all of his music? What's going on here, Seth?
Well, they're buying performance royalties potentially. They're buying the writer share potentially. These deals are all structured differently. And they're certainly buying any publishing that the artist maybe never, assigned to anybody else that they've administered over their career. One of the reasons I think you're seeing guys like Dylan and Neil Young, I believe, and some of these other talents that are selling their entire catalogs is because of the tax rates in the United States. I mean, that's really what a lot of this boils down to at the end of the day. When you hit a certain age, the tax rates on income, which would be a royalty, are much higher than they are on a capital gain, which is something you would do when you sell your entire asset. So a lot of these are tax plays by the talent, especially when they're in their 70s and really at the end of their career. And you could really you save a tremendous amount of money by doing it as a capital gain, and then you can put that money, to the next generations.
So with a deal like that, is a company like Merck's company, are they getting all the revenue from Bob Dylan's songs, whether it be from publishing or from whatever, in perpetuity, like for the rest of time, basically? And
Yeah,
and
I mean,
and that's what.
every deal is
So,
structured differently. I don't know the details of his deal, for example, but yeah, usually what you would do is you would sell your publishing rights. Sometimes you keep consent rights. Sometimes you sell, your entire catalog to a company like this, maybe even the writer share, so you wouldn't be getting royalties, but you retain some sort of control. So maybe they don't put that into a political ad that you might not want, or they don't put it in a scene in a very violent television show that might offend your senses. So there are things that sometimes people build in. Some people don't care. Money at the end of the day solves all those problems. So it really just depends on each and every deal. But usually, if you're the buyer, you're going to want as much as you can humanly get, especially when you have the type of money that Hypnosis has.
yeah. So, Adam, you being an artist manager in the business, what's your take on this whole thing and how it's affecting the business as it stands now?
Well, people have been selling their publishing for years. We've had artists that have sold it for pennies on the dollar because they've needed money at that point. My take on it is I've just done a deal, quite a hefty deal, not in the Bob Dylan or the Beyonce sort of figures, but with one of our artists, where we've sold master rights to one of the labels, which they owned. We've sold more product to, we sold more catalog to them because the artist is of an age where um, they, obviously with COVID at the moment, people are struggling for money because there's no live income, especially if they've been reliant on that for years. So my whole take on it is you get to a point in your life where it takes a lot of administration to get this money in. If you're feeling you're of retirement age, or even though you're going to continue, you there's a lot you can do with a lump sum of money. You can put it in trust funds for your kids. You can have control over it now while you're alive. And of course, you know, there's been a lot of cases where you know, the artist dies and are not or the dependent, sorry, of that, you know, the next generation of that catalogue. There's a lot of work in administering that, you know, and getting the potential. So it's a bit like, you know, if you win the lottery, do you take the lump sum now, or do you take it over 25 years? I always used to say I'd take it over 25 years. The older I get, my view has changed.
That's
Oh,
funny.
did Adam freeze on us?
Can you see me?
Oh, yeah, you're back. Okay.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, you know, I think it's a good thing that that option's there. Nobody's putting a gun to their head, and I think right now, especially in the times we're in, for a lot of the sort of B, C, and D level artists, it could be life.
Well, what has changed in order to have this suddenly become such a predominant thing now? Why are we hearing so much about this now and not like 10 years ago, 20 years ago? This can't be a new
Well,
idea.
well, Merck Mikuriadis has got a public funded company with him a lot of money, and he's great at doing PR. You know, that's why we're
Well, he's
hearing
not the
about
only one though. I mean, we have Roundhill, we have Primary Wave. I mean, they're all
it.
Primary Wave today just bought Sun Records for $30 million. So they have all of the masters for, like, you know, Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins and all this stuff. So it's not just artists. I also know that Bob Rock just sold off his producer right, all of his producer royalties to Merck's company. So
I think it's being at the
why
right time. I think right now the right time to do this. Personally, you know, I think that you know a lot of these, we're at the end of the first generation of rock and roll, where you know we're now 65 years since Elvis Presley. A lot of people are dying off, and I think there is just the talent that has these copyrights. It's the right time for them to sell. I don't think when they're in their 30s and 40s they were going to sell. We've got artists that are in their 50s that I've approached about this and don't not in any way want to consider this right now. But when they're in their 70s, it's something that they're looking at.
So Seth, why how can a company like Hipgnosis justify $400 million for the Bob Dylan catalog, or any of the other staggering sums that they've paid out? Is there really, like, I can't imagine that Bob Dylan's made $400 million in his entire career. How is it suddenly that these are worth that much money?
You know, that's where due diligence comes in, and you hope that it's done correctly. They certainly gave Marty Bandier a lot of grief for buying, you know, the Motown catalog for the amount of money he did, which was a staggering sum at the time, and they recouped that very quickly. So I think if your team is in place, if you're Merck, you certainly have the team in place. You know, to be able to bring in syncs and make sure that the music is properly streamed, and open up maybe other avenues that the artist didn't do before. I mean, Dylan certainly allowed his stuff to be used. You just had to pay a premium for it. But there's a lot of artists out there that haven't. So you know, that can open up a lot of revenue sources. I mean, I think the money is staggering. I wouldn't want that pressure to have to recoup that money personally. I mean, that really is just a staggering amount of money, but it's also the prestige. You know, if you become the only place that has Dylan, there's value to that. And maybe that brings on other catalogs that bring on other catalogs that bring on other catalogs. And you had asked, why is this a thing now? I think Adam is right. And I think the background that Merck brings, coming from artist management, unlike Terra Firma, which was considered one of the biggest failures in private equity acquisition history, because they weren't even from the music business, and they came in and swinging around a sledgehammer, acting like they knew what they were doing and correct a business they knew nothing about. So I think having the pedigree of artist management and then all of that money would make a lot of people feel very comfortable that, hey, he managed Elton John. I think he probably will be able to handle us. Elton's pretty particular.
And okay, well,
No,
speaking to you as a guy who looks after the repertoires of some very well-known artists, have you personally been approached about deals like this for any of the artists that you represent?
Well, sure. I mean, Frank Sinatra Enterprises, when the reprise material reverted back to the family, it's got to be a decade ago now. Warner Brothers didn't want to lose that, and Warner Brothers bought, the assets. And so we have certainly been through that. My other artist, Peggy Lee, she was a songwriter, prolific songwriter, and never sold her publishing because her granddaughter runs the business with me, and Peggy was very clear with her granddaughter that this is going to be your legacy. And if you sell it, you're going to lose the legacy because you're going to sell it to somebody that's not going to care about it as much as you. So I think it depends on where the family is, where you are personally. If you're an artist that's alive, like you said, if you're if you're in your 70s, you might think very differently about this than when you're in your 40s or your 50s.
So, Adam, what do you think would be reasons why an artist wouldn't want to take advantage of something like this?
well, just to add what Seth was saying there, I think also having Nile Rodgers with Merck, with being a prolific songwriter that he was, also adds credence to his whole philosophy on buying master rights, so buying publishing rights, I should say. Um, why would, sorry, Ace, could you repeat that question?
No problem. But considering the amount of money that's on the table on some of these deals now, what would be the reasons an artist wouldn't take advantage of this these days?
Because we don't know where the music business is going. We're at the end, as I said, of the first generation. Um, we've got you know we're in a situation where I think rock music is effectively dead now for the next generation. If you look back, we're 55 years, 65 years, 55 years since the Beatles, 65 years since Elvis. We're at the end of that generation. I think that we, the new generation is not embracing rock music like we did when we were kids. And I feel that some artists still think that there is life left in that sort of music. Now, I think some of the classics are going to be around forever, but how do I know that? I'm going to be around another 20, 25 years, hopefully. And after that, who knows where the business is going? I think some of the artists feel that as Seth said about the Peggy Lee thing, it's about having that. That's all that the kids have got. It's just that so why sell it now? Why sell something for $30,000, say 20 years ago, when it's worth $300,000 now? You can't in 20 years invest $30,000 anywhere, with the exception of possibly a good real estate deal and like make that sort of return on it. So you don't know if you give that to your kids right now, if another 20 years it's going to be worth $3 million, because we just don't know where it is. So I think that's the reason why a lot of artists are hesitant about it, because they don't know what the future brings. It's gambling at the end of the day, isn't it? It's gambling your career, your legacy on, do you take the cash now or do you wait a bit and see if the exchange rate goes up?
Well, and it's not just investment companies like Hipgnosis that are getting in on this deal. I mean, the labels are expanding their influence. I mean, very famously, just a short while ago, BMG paid some massive undisclosed sum to control 80% of Mick Fleetwood's catalog with all those Fleetwood Mac songs. So that that smacks to me of a possible inherent conflict of interest. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't well, like we've just done a deal with an artist where the label owns a percentage of the masters that we've, and they were paying royalties to the artist. They already own it. They own it in perpetuity. It was a major label, and but they've just bought us out of any royalties that were due in the future. And you know we've valued it at about sort of 15 times what it's worth. So you're getting equivalent of about 15 years worth of royalty right now, and there's a lot that you can do with that lump sum. I don't think it's a conflict of interest necessarily. I just think it's them making an offer. The artist doesn't have to sign it, doesn't have to take that deal. It is just purely business. It's corporate business. It's they've got money, and if you want it, you can have it.
Now, Seth, you know, one of the thing, like the three of us who are the four of us here who are on this right now, we all are familiar with publishing and the terms involved here. But I usually, when I ever talk to people who aren't as well versed in the business as we are, their eyes glaze over when they start talking about master rights and publishing rights. So maybe you could just take a couple of moments and give a basic primer on what is actually being sold here. What's the difference between what is a master right, what is a publishing right, etc.
Sure. So there's in essence two sides to a song. There's the person that recorded the song, the band that recorded the song, the master, called that because of the master tape. And then there are the writers of the song. So Elvis was not a writer, but you know Jerry Lieber and Stoller were. So there's two sides, as an example, to that copyright. And one person tends to have a little bit more control of that copyright than another, and that's the writer, because you can't do anything without the song. You can certainly go out and do
Right,
plenty without the recording by re-recording it if you wanted to. And
right,
so it's much more lucrative in the publishing world. It tends to be more protected under federal law in most countries, in that you can't go into a restaurant without somebody getting a nickel for playing the music on a jukebox or covering the song or playing it on television through an ASCAP or a BMI license. The master recording doesn't necessarily participate in that. So usually the value is in the publishing. And, you know, I think another reason why people are selling too is because they've seen those performance checks go down. They call it mailbox money because you don't do anything to earn it. It's just money that comes in. Well, I shouldn't say you don't have to work for it at this time. You've certainly earned it. Um, but, you know, with restaurants being closed globally, with theaters being closed globally, with venues being closed, gyms being closed all over the world, that performance money is just dried up. And so now's a chance for a lot of people to say, hey, I don't know when this is going to open again comfortably. And if I'm in my mid 70s, it may not be in my lifetime.
so having said that, most of these companies are buying, as you said, the publishing rights. A few of them are going after the master rights. So if the artist is left with his master rights, what can he still do with those rights? What is still in his ballywick of tools to exploit those rights?
Well, you can do, you know, you can do anything with those rights. You can certainly license them. You can put them in TV shows, movies, commercials, compilation albums. You know, you're just stuck with a recording that's either from a period of time or, I mean, it's never ever going to change. If you have the publishing, you can update that song as the times change. You can update that song to maybe a female version versus a male version. The recording, you're sort of stuck, but you have the same options other than re-recording that you would have with the publisher. You can go out and you can license it. You're just, you know, you're just limited to the recording that you have.
So just to sum that up, let's say Bob Dylan, if he still has the master rights to his songs, he puts out a greatest hits album tomorrow. He would get the money from the portion of the revenue of that album sale that goes to the performer, but the publishing money would now go to all to Hipgnosis from this point forward.
That's
Would that be
correct. And
correct?
then they would pay him that's correct. And if he struck a deal where he still has his writer share, then the publisher would collect for both and then pass on his writer share to him through a royalty. If he sold both of it, then he wouldn't receive anything except for a royalty on the master recording.
So, Adam, if an artist has master rights and sells them to somebody else, does that mean that he doesn't have control over how his or her song is used anymore?
No, we retain artistic control in all the contracts that we've done. Even though they have the rights, the master rights, they have to consult the artist. In my case, we retain the artistic control on it.
Okay.
I've done the
So,
same with my artists too.
Yeah.
okay.
Meaning that if they wanted to put the song with a particular political campaign that the artist was detrimental to the artist, or an advertising campaign which was detrimental to the artist, then the artist could stop that. But basically, it's really just down to the income in most cases. It just means that any income from it, they're just paying in advance. They're giving you a loan, and the loan payments are whatever they make from it. Well, I say they're giving you a loan. They're basically buying your house on spec that they can sell it later for more money, if that's a simple term there to use. Simple analogy.
So
Right.
so
And
far
then
we've
and then
talked.
what a lot
Oh, go ahead, Seth. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and a lot of times what'll happen is, you want to retain some form of control on the recordings. You want to make sure, like I said, you don't put it in a political campaign for someone that you're not a fan of. And what you can do is you build in consent language versus consult language. And the consult language is, the new owner of the recording comes to you and says, "Hey, we're going to do this." And you really don't have much say. We're just informing you that it's going to happen. And then if you raise enough of a stink, because nobody wants to fight with their artist, really, then that you could raise a red flag, and usually that's the way to get around a lot of those.
So,
Also, can I just add something in there?
sure.
With the way that we promote music nowadays, the master rights owner is going to want the artist to be on their side, because through social media, through all the internet channels, the artist can ultimately stop their fans buying these releases if he really wants to make a big deal about it. So normally it's a bit like, when these major labels have master rights in perpetuity and they're putting out greatest hits and everything. They want the artist to be on. They want the consent of the artist, 100% consentful to it, so that they can promote it on their social media channels, because it will stop sales if one of our artists goes on social media and says, "By the way, Universal are putting out this greatest hits, don't buy it." It's going to affect a lot of sales, which is obviously going to affect their income.
That's right. Look at Taylor Swift. It's a great
Yeah,
example.
that was.
Exactly.
So far we've talked a lot about the actual logistics and the ins and outs of what's going on here. What we haven't touched on so far is this really a good thing for the music industry overall, or what are your point of views on that? Start with you, Adam.
I think it's an option that right now, as I say, during COVID, during these hard times, artists that were primarily making most of their money from touring, it's a great way of making them survive, But so I don't think there's anything wrong with it personally. I think it's just opportunists are finding a way that have the money, of finding the way of investing in and helping the artists out in like the meantime. I don't know why Bob Dylan particularly needs the money. So maybe it's not just because of the money with all that, but maybe he goes, you know what, I can invest this for my next descendants. But as I said, there's a lot of administration that's involved with this as well, which, some of the, I remember when, my dad was going to pass me his business. I wasn't interested in his business at all. So, he he passed it down to somebody that was, which wasn't a relative, you know. So maybe because the generations change and we're at the end of that first generation of the sort of modern music era. Prior to 1955, it was big band, trad jazz, and all that other stuff. You know, okay, you had the Frank Sinatra still, and you know, but it was I'd say the mid '50s was when rock and roll was born. We're now moving on to that next era, and maybe, you know, things are changing. I mean, the physical side of product is becoming non-existent in the way of a money earner. It's all streaming, and these artists maybe go, I don't know how we're going to, you know, look at all the streaming channels that are not paying the royalties that the artists should get. Maybe they're saying, listen, there's this money on the table. There's a few $100 million here that I want a portion of that for my administering it. I don't know where it's going to go. It's a good thing. So I think it's a great option. I don't have a problem with it.
How about you, Seth? You know, going from a more as Adam put it, the previous generation of stuff. Do you think that this is a good thing or a bad thing for our industry?
No, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's different because we've always viewed record labels as creators, right? So they always have had catalog, but they've always signed artists and created and moved, and so they've built their catalogs. This is very different. This is not a house builder. This is a house flipper. This is somebody that comes in and is buying up stuff that previously exists and then wants to administer it and you know, get as much money out of it as possible. And that's, I think in our industry, that's something that's, for some people, it's anathema to them, that, you know, it's like the money grubbers type of thing. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I deal in catalogs, so I don't deal in having new stuff that I control. So for somebody to come along that might have a fantastic ability to administer and collect every nickel that they can collect from me and maybe start breaking into Russia and China and actually get royalties out of those places, that's somebody I would 100% talk to. But if I were a new artist, I don't know that I would go there. I don't know that they would be building the infrastructure to be able to support a new record and to be able to promote that. That might still be the purview of the record labels, which we, as we know, are shrinking. You know, they're much more smaller labels that sit in a conglomerate of a bigger label company like the Universals or the Warner Brothers. So I think both of them can live together.
So we touched on it just earlier in this conversation, but I don't think I really got to the root of what I was trying to get at. With the legacy artists that you represent, you said you had been approached about these sort of deals. Have you had any of your artists take advantage of this sort of of a deal?
Yeah, well, the Sinatra certainly did. You can, you know, Google it and read all about the deal that was struck. It was a long time ago, so I don't remember all the details. But yes, I've sold a royalty stream. Actually, I sold masters and kept the royalty stream from an artist. Nat King Cole, we've done that. Nat King Cole was one of the last of the big artists to be at Capitol Records in 1963. Sinatra had left, Dean Martin had left, the Beach Boys weren't quite there yet, the Beatles weren't quite there yet, and they were very afraid to lose Nat King Cole. So they struck a deal with him where the label did, where he would own his masters from a certain period of time. And we were able to strike a deal with Universal so we wouldn't have to split the catalog, where they would be able to retain ownership, but we would retain our royalty stream and our consent rights and all the contractual obligations that were afforded to him under his original 1950s contract. And that bode very well for us. And it was fantastic from a tax perspective because it was a capital gain versus an income. Like right. I said, this is, a lot of people are taking advantage of this, and it's significant. The last tax structure significantly reduced capital gains. And, you know, on a $10 million deal, the difference can be close to $2 million between income, which would be a royalty, and a capital gain. That's not chump change for people.
No, definitely not. Well, there you have part 1 of 2 of our conversation about music funds, buying up music and all that sort of thing. I want to thank Mark, Seth, and Adam for all joining me today. And you can you can join us now over at the patreon.com platform, where we are going to go into our after hours show and have another discussion there. And you can always send us feedback at acetalksmusic@gmail.com. And thank you for your continued support. And until next time, stay safe.